My name's Chris and welcome to the acreage. On today's episode, I'm going to basically finish the mosquito traps. I'm going to build the filtration system that's going to allow me to easily filter the traps, and most importantly, quickly filter the traps. And I'm going to try a couple of different cooling vests to figure out how to better deal with the heat that we get out here inevitably. So let's get to it. Last week, I made the mosquito traps. They're not perfect, but they were a start. Over the course of the week, I filtered them once using geotextile fabric and the shop towels. And it kind of worked. It was really slow. I don't have that kind of patience. So this week, I wanted to solve that problem. So there's two phases to the filter. So the original version of the manual traps had a double basket system. There was two bins, one inside the other. And the inside bin had holes cut in the bottom with screens riveted on. It was really time consuming to create. And I didn't want to do that because the screens clog up, eventually they start falling apart, and that's no good. So what I did instead was I created a two-part filter. One is just using regular window screen that gets rid of most of the big bulky stuff. The slime tends to stick to it and it's really easy to clean out. All that is a square out of 2x4s, small enough so that way it would just fit over the top of a 5-gallon pail. I want to make it so that way it's really easy to pour and you don't have to fuss a lot with it. I put the window screen over the 2x4s and I made it so that way it drapes underneath. And the reason is so that way there's lots of surface area, but also it sort of allows the whole thing to sit inside the bucket. So that way when the water goes through the screen, it sticks to the outside and then goes down in the center rather than trying to get out of the bucket. And that piece worked perfectly, exactly as I expected. It actually was able to collect some of the larvae. They were wiggling around in there and not too happy about it, but that's perfectly fine. The less there is that can pass through to the finer filter, the better. And the second part of the filter was a bunch of plumbing pieces on either side of a pool filter. These were really cheap Amazon pool filters, and they were very, very fussy to work with. But I created just a pipe so that way it was angled, so that way the water could be poured in one end and go into the filter at the other. What I built today was janky, but that's fine. The whole point was to build something that would work, and I could test a couple of assumptions, and over time I'm going to make it a little bit better. One of the issues with it is I had to run strings from one end to the other to sort of support it and keep it from falling backwards and keep the funnel that I put in from tipping backwards and dumping out on the backside. It would make a lot more sense to have something that was a little bit more permanent. In this case, it's just, you know, all the fittings are just sort of sat together because there's enough friction between them that it works. And I don't have to worry about wasting these parts. They're going to become actual plumbing at some point in their lives. But for now, they're serving the purpose of the trap. And it works perfectly. In the other versions that we've built of this, it's more or less the same concept, but the filter is less exposed, so you can't be looking at it to see if it's clogging up or whatever, because eventually, after you use the filter a few times, the gunk will back up into it, and it won't have a lot of surface area left to drain with. And so it's really important to be able to recognize when that's happening, so that way you can, you know, knock it out or back flush it or do whatever you've got to do. But now I have a system that works really well. There are a lot of rafts in the traps. The traps are doing their job. So let's take a look at our trap, shall we? My goodness. So let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28 rafts. So this is exactly what you want, because as I said before, each one of these things is 200 to 300 mosquitoes, and these traps are just working perfectly. The filtering of the system is super fast. The screen is like literally the amount of time it takes you to pour from one to the other, and the filter is a little bit slower. There's a couple things that I can do to make that better, and it's a little bit finicky, but it's still only a couple of minutes. All I need to do now is make that second stage a little bit more robust, so that way it doesn't want to fall apart on me. And I'm just going to build more traps and spread them around. And, you know, as I mentioned in the last video, you know, the goal with these traps isn't to stop the individual mosquito. I had somebody ask me on the last video about the mosquito that lays its eggs and it goes out and it bites someone else. And that could happen. It's not really that likely, but it could happen. And I'm not really that worried about it, because in the absence of the traps, there's millions and millions of mosquitoes. For the one that escapes and comes and might bite you, that's something I'm willing to accept as a consequence of this type of trap, because you've caught the mosquito, you have hundreds fewer mosquitoes for the next week, and then thousands fewer the next week, and hundreds of thousands fewer the week after that. And so that over season after season, you end up to the point where you almost never see mosquitoes anymore. So the first thing that I did this week is test out a couple of relatively inexpensive cooling vests. The first vest that I got was an evaporative vest, and that's pretty straightforward, works on the same principle as sweat. it worked. I can't really say that it didn't work, but that being said, it was uncomfortable because you get so wet while you're wearing it, and eventually as you're moving around it starts to rub against you and you just feel really uncomfortable. And honestly, I can't say it's any better than just having a wet t-shirt. It lasts longer, sure, but it's really heavy for what it is. And so I used it for a couple hours in the heat. I got a fair bit done, even though it was pretty hot out. One of the things that I noticed after the fact was I didn't have a heat hangover. Now, obviously that can range from just a little discomfort while you're cooling down through to full heat stroke. But even though I was really hot, and I think one of the things that was most uncomfortable while I was wearing it was my chest was feeling cool, but my head was just overheating, and I had to constantly soak my hat so that way I didn't overheat. And generally speaking, I find when my head is hot, it's the worst while I'm out here. But I can't say that it didn't work. The thing is that a couple days later, when I was testing the second vest, the humidity was up at 60%, 70%, which means you're going to get a lot less evaporation, which means it's not going to cool nearly as much, and eventually, at some percentage humidity, it's not going to work at all. And I mean, we get humid days, and I think it's really important that whatever system that I have can adapt to that. So the second version that I got was what's called a phase change material. In this case, I think the phase change material was just a gelled ice. So you freeze it and it melts. But I knew that that wasn't going to be ideal, because the colder the material is that's on your body, the less comfortable it is. And what you want to have is something that is relatively close to body temperature in, the 15 to 18 degrees Celsius range, because then that just feels cool on the skin and it cools your body while not feeling uncomfortable. So what I did was I created a sodium sulfate and sodium chloride phase change material based on the video from NightHawkInLight. And NightHawkInLight is another YouTube channel, and he's doing a lot of experimentations with cooling of different kinds, whether it's cooling the body or using hyper white panels to reflect heat into space. And I love his channel. And the second that I saw his video about a phase change material, I realized it's something that I was going to want to try. And that's what I did here. I'm not going to go too deep into the creation of the phase change material. You can just go watch his video if you're interested. In my case, I just got the materials, table salt, which is sodium chloride, sodium sulfate, which is a kind of salt, and I mixed them in water to the proportions that he suggested, and used the xanthan gum that he suggested as a gelling material to create not the weirdest material I've ever experienced, but it's certainly a weird material. And I don't know that I got the proportions exactly right, because it seems like it is freezing at a lower temperature than he suggested, which was 18°C. From my testing, it seems like mine is freezing at about 10 degrees. But actually, that actually works better for when you're working, because the amount of heat that it can absorb is relative to my temperature versus its temperature in the surface area. And if I'm really hot, it's not going to be able to cool me fast enough. So the fact that it feels cooler than 18 degrees actually works in my favor. So it might be that I just added a little bit too much water. It actually doesn't really matter. But the cool thing about this material is that it's a gel, so it feels like Jell-O, and it will freeze solid if it gets cold enough. But even when it's a gel and it's easily moved around in the bag, it still feels cool to the touch. And it feels cool to the touch forever, it seems like. In spite of the fact that I made the phase change material from NightHawkInLight's video, I also tried the phase change material that came with the vest. And almost immediately I could tell it didn't work. It wasn't going to be what I needed. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take this icy pack, you're supposed to put it in a little piece of bubble wrap so that way it's not too cold against your skin and it insulates it a little bit basically. When I had it in its little baggie, it wasn't cold enough. I had one side was my phase change material and the other side was the ice. One half of me was getting hot really quickly. So I tried taking it out of its bag and then it was too cold and it was uncomfortable and it was sharp because it was solid ice and it was just, it didn't work. Almost right away I switched to my phase change material. And I continued to work with it for a couple hours and it was perfect. I've been using it ever since. So this is the PCM vest, and how do I sum it up? It's weird. When I put my hand underneath, it's definitely cool. Like it doesn't feel like the evaporative vest, like it doesn't feel wet and clammy, it just feels cool. It also doesn't feel cold, like at times when the wind was really strong, the evaporative vest felt cold. This one doesn't. And I feel hot, but I cool down really fast. And I think that's probably better. I think part of the problem is that it's just there's not enough, but the packets that came with it are awful. Whereas I actually found with the PCM, I take that same bubble wrap and I put it on the back side so that way it's insulating. Because at first when I had it, it was cold here and so I was getting condensation on the outside. But since I put the bubble wrap on the back, it's actually much better. So ultimately I think the PCM is a real success. The only thing that is not is this vest. So I have to make something that's a little bit more suited to my, shall we say, round body type, and something that's also able to deal with the fact that I have a relatively long body. Looking at this, I think what this is a life jacket without the flotation in it. And so that, like, on the side, the straps, they tighten backwards instead of forwards. It makes it freaking useless. It's really hard to get tight. And there's also these, I think the idea is to provide padding to your shoulders. They just flop out and get in the way. They're useless. So I'm going to have to make my own vest. But I've been here for about 2 hours. And I've did about the same amount of work as I did with the evaporative vest on. But it's 3 degrees warmer raw temp and like 5 degrees warmer humidity. And while I'm hot, the PCM it just feels cooler against my body, especially when I'm out of the wind. The only thing I think that would really help is having something underneath my hat. Before I came here, I filled up the pails at my mom's place and I didn't use the vest. And I took out one of the PCM bags and I just I was putting it around on my body because I was so hot. And then after it cooled down from its initial freezer temperature, I put on top of my head and like instant difference. I felt like I was human again, just like almost instantly. And it was more comfortable and it wasn't so cold that it hurt. Like it wasn't like giving you an ice cream headache, but it was also cold enough that it actually felt like it was cooling your head down, and you just move it around a little bit on your body. And that one single packet, like in here I've got, 6 packets total, but it was one single, like even now I've been wearing this now for almost 2 hours, like I said, and it's cold to the touch, like almost like cool tap water temperature. And I mean, this has been pressed against my hot sweating body now for all that time. It's weird. NightHawkInLight described it that way, as being really weird, and I like it. I just have to figure out how to make it work better in this situation. I've had a few comments from friends who thought that this was going to be a building channel, me building my log cabin home and everything else, and it is. But these are the problems I have to solve first. I overheat too easily, and if I don't solve this problem, I can't do the things. So I'm a problem solver at heart, and I want to find the best way, the easiest way, and I think I'm just going to have to incorporate that in my channel. And, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to start building, and I'm only going to be able to start building because of these. Because today's supposed to be really hot, then tomorrow's supposed to be really hot, then we're going to get a couple cool days, and then it's supposed to be really hot again. And the only way that I'm going to be able to function is if I can keep my temperature down. So yeah, this is a win. Even though, like today, for example, today I was working on the mosquito traps, and it's not super hot out today, but as I'm moving around, I heat up and I get uncomfortable. Well, I put the vest on, almost immediately I started to cool down. And even though like my shirt was a little bit wet from condensation, it wasn't bad at all. I actually really enjoyed it because it's comfortable and I don't overheat. Now, the evaporative vest worked. As I said, it doesn't work really well in high humidity. The phase change material, it doesn't care. I made more than enough of the phase change material to make multiple sets of cooling bags that I could put in the vest. So even though I'm not going to use the material that came with the vest in the vest, I'm still going to use it. I have a soft cooler bag, and I'm taking all of that ice and just putting it in the cooler bag and then putting my packs on top. And the other thing that's great about the phase change material is that because it can still be cold and pliable and squishy, when I'm really, really hot, it's my head that I'm noticing the most, and I'm sweating a lot, I'm uncomfortable, and I'm not thinking straight. I can just take one of these things and put it on top of my head, and it's like wearing a cool helmet. It's great. It really feels good because it's not super cold, but it's cold enough that it's cooling your head down, and it takes away that sense of I'm overheating and I don't know what to do. Now, one of the things that NightHawkInLight suggests in his video is to soak some fabric, like a towel, and put it into a bag so that way you can use it as a seat cushion, basically, a cooling seat cushion. And I'm going to extrapolate that to a face cloth, so that way I can literally put it underneath my hat and have a cool pad underneath my hat, so that way it's always keeping my head cool. And then I'm also going to make a new, better fitting vest. Like the vest that came from China, it's garbage. I've already ripped one of the cinches on the side because it's sewn so poorly. And the way that it's made, it doesn't suit it. Like it feels uncomfortable, not because of the cooling, but because it doesn't fit right. So as I go forward, I'm gonna make a new vest. And I also am going to incorporate in that vest a little bit of insulation on the outside. Having something a little bit more custom, it's going to be better made, it's going to fit better, and I can put larger pouches into the vest, so that way there's more volume of phase change material. It's going to make it so much better, and I'm going to be able to work for even longer in the heat. And that's what I wanted. It serves the purpose that on Monday, when I was testing out the phase change material, it was 33 degrees with a humidex of 41. It was ridiculously hot. And in those temperatures, normally I can't function at all. I'm stuck in air conditioning, and that's just the way that it is. But I was able to dig in gravel for 2 hours in that temperature. And like I said, my head got hot in the end, but I got in the truck and I just put one of the packs on top of my head, and with the vest still on, and within 10 minutes, I cooled down. It was great. For all this time, one of the things that was most stressing me out about coming out here was getting overheated and not being able to function and making bad decisions overall, because there's a really good chance that I can hurt myself because I'm overheating and I make a stupid decision and I put myself in harm's way. Having a means that is relatively cheap and effective to keep myself cool, or if I do overheat, to not have to run the truck and whatever else and jump through all these hoops, I can just dolly out this bag full of ice and phase change material to manage my heat at all times, and I'm so happy with it. So the next thing I did this week was I made a glorious pizza. Now the reason that I'm showing this to you is not to say, you know, this is how you should make pizza or anything of the sort, even though a lot of these channels oftentimes have a little segment of cooking a meal. The reason that I'm including me making pizza is because it gives you a sense of my mind and why I'm doing this channel the way that I am. When I make pizza, I go all out. I enjoy what is, by all accounts, a gourmet pizza. And over the years, I've slowly gone from when I was really young, buying a pizza crust from the store, buying crappy cheese from the store, and putting some pepperoni on it and calling it a pizza. And then I got a little older, I got some money, and I would just buy pizza from a pizza shop. But after I got married, my wife and I, we both like to cook. And I have been continuously improving my pizzas. So over the last 10 years, I've been taking the time to try different ingredients and improve them and make them better. So the whole experience of the pizza is just a good one. We have pizza stones. We've made our own crust for the longest time. But this time, now that my wife is starting to get into sourdough, we made a sourdough crust. The process is a little bit long-winded. I like to have onions and mushrooms on my pizza, but I want them to be cooked. So I cook those ahead of time, and I did that on the barbecue because it was really, really hot out. I prepared all of the materials ahead of time. In my case, like I said, onions and mushrooms. And I also like 3 different cheeses. I have a mozzarella, a Irish cheese, it's called Dubliner, and a Parmesan. And I also put on bacon, pepperoni, red pepper, and green olives. And this ends up making a really thick pizza. It's a really hearty pizza. It's a really flavorful pizza. And for me, the flavor profile is great. And the reason that this sort of highlights my brain is I don't ever leave good enough alone. I'm constantly trying to find ways to make whatever it is that I'm doing better. And this channel isn't going to be any different. I'm trying new camera setups, I'm trying new audio setups. When I'm doing the traps, I'm thinking about how do I make those better. When I made the filtration system that I made today, I threw it together in order to be able to make sure that it worked exactly the way that I wanted it to, so that way the next version is better, and I'm always going to be improving things. I don't want to make it seem like I'm trying to do the best, but I'm trying to do the best for me. And I like solving problems, and I like challenging myself. So when you see me doing different things, it's as much about trying to improve and challenge myself as it is about making content. And sometimes it might seem a little bit scattered, and that's why I'm planning on making a second channel that's more about making, and I'm not going to belabor those things on this channel. I really want to document my experience. And I think that's what's going to make my channel a little bit different in the end, is because it's a mix of inventing and experimenting and just the whole process of building out this homestead. Doing things in different ways, not necessarily for the sake of doing it differently, but because I think I can make it a little bit easier for myself for the next time. And I think that's important because I'm mostly here by myself, at least for now. And if I don't figure out how to improve my lot, so that way I don't overheat, so that way I can move large things and have a good experience, and I'm no stranger to failure. It's just that I like to figure out a path that minimizes the failure the next time. The early part of this journey was really stressful because there were so many unknowns. I didn't know how I was going to edit. I didn't know how I was going to film. I didn't know if anybody was going to even like the content. Well, I'm certainly not a big channel yet, but I feel like I've managed to get over some of these humps. But I'm still always going to be trying to figure out, how do I do it better next time? So next week, the plan is to clear the area of the first thing that I'm going to build, which is the sleep camp, and start collecting some of the building materials. I haven't decided how I'm going to build that yet, whether I'm just going to stick build it like any other structure, or if I'm going to do a timber frame or something along those lines. I've got a lot of spruce back there that have died due to spruce budworm, and I'm going to start thinning them out and see what quality the wood is in. If it's good enough, I might start doing a timber frame. In the house that I want to build, I want to use a combination of log building and timber frame and so forth. As a result, I want to practice those techniques so that way I'm not having to learn it all on the most expensive and largest structure here. So as I go along, almost everything I build is going to be built slightly differently, just so that way I can experiment and play with and try different things. So that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one. Yo, hello. As simply a cooling medium. Shit. Sorry, I didn't mean to drop you. The dangers of deer flies. They'll drop you right to the ground. Yeah. Skip, skip.
Ole!